Hola a todos, ¿cómo están? Hoy nos encontramos acá en la Plaza de la Constitución, a puertas del Palacio de Gobierno, junto a un gran invitado que nos ha venido a visitar acá a Chile, que ha dado conferencias a lo largo de todo Santiago, llenando los auditorios, que es el gran profesor David Friedman. David Friedman es doctor en economía, doctor en física, profesor de economía y también profesor de Derecho, que hoy nos acompaña, en donde vamos a estar discutiendo alguna de lo que ha sido su trabajo, como ha sido este libro, su primer libro del año 73, que se llama La maquinaria de la libertad. Él es un profesor que es de orientación anarcocapitalista, en donde nos explica que él considera que no debería haber casi, sino más bien ningún servicio que provee el Estado que no pueda proveer el mercado y de mejor forma. Por lo tanto, ahora vamos a conversar un poco sobre lo que ha pasado acá en Santiago y vamos a tratar de escuchar algunas de sus propuestas en cómo el mercado puede solucionar algunos de los problemas contingentes en la sociedad chilena. Dr. Friedman, thank you very much for joining us in this interview that we have outside of the governmental palace. So thank you for the time, first of all, and thank you for your visit. How have you been?
I have been enjoying my visit. I just spent some time wandering around the mercado, and I like markets where people are selling things in many different ways. I got some cherries and some apricots, which are fresh in Chile and in America have to be shipped from Chile, which makes them not as good.
Yes.
But that was interesting. It seems like a nice place. There seem to be quite a lot of enthusiastic libertarians, most of them young, which is nice.
It's good. Did it call your attention, so many young people going for the libertarian ideas here in South America?
The problem is that I'm only seeing the ones who are.
Yeah.
That is to say, in a country with a population of many millions, the fact that there are a few hundred people who believe in libertarianism or communism or anything else doesn't tell you very much. So I would have to know what fraction of people do that and what fraction of people believe in socialism and what fraction of people believe in other things to have some idea of whether it's really optimistic. It's nice, it's pleasant speaking to people who want to hear what I have to say, but I have no way of telling if they are a tiny minority or a large movement, pretty lively movement judging by the people, so it'll probably keep growing, but how big it is I can't tell.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we invite you here, because we want to actually make libertarians a large majority, right?
Uh-huh.
So especially in the convulsory times that we've been living these days here in Chile. Well, right now we're in the municipal of Santiago, who just changed administration after a very long time to a communist mayor. And now we've seen a lot of troubles, a lot of problems that weren't a characteristic of part of this municipal, such as dirty streets, a lot of prostitution, for example, not far away from here, actually in front of the municipal building, and a lot of commerciant, like street sellers, that actually work more as mafias. So they taken full streets, stolen for people, insecurities been growing up. And one of the problems that I want to mention you, and I would love to ask you, what do you think would do the market about it, is that lately we've been having a lot of trouble with graffitis, right? And one of a particular case happened not long ago, where a person that lives half his store in a really typical building here in Santiago decided to pay himself to paint the graffitis that they put in his store. And the municipal fined him, because in order for him to paint his building, that is in a really particular traditional sector, you need to ask the municipal before you paint it. What do you think about that?
We had a rather similar experience in Chicago about 30 years ago when we needed, I think, to repair the fence of our house. And it was about a 100-year-old house. And it turned out that we had to get permission from the city to repair our own fence. And my wife ended up spending about a day walking from one city office to another. And she thought it would probably have taken 2 or 3 days if she hadn't had a baby with her, which I guess embarrassed the clerks at keeping her there. So I think that kind of problem, saying you can't do things without government permission, is a serious problem, but a serious problem in many countries. There's either a bumper sticker or a button, I'm not sure I remember, which I remember seeing, which said, don't commit suicide. It's illegal to destroy government property.
We're pretty close to that here, apparently.
Yes.
Well, and also one of your lectures that you went to foundation, right? You talk about how government, once you allow the government start licensing certain careers or professions, then you don't really have a really good argument to tell them to stop, and that create a lot of problems.
What usually happens once you have professional licensing is that it gets controlled by the profession, since the people already in the profession are the ones with the most interest in it. And they then use it to make it harder to join the profession so as to have less competition. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is the story of medical licensing in the US and of licensing of barbers in American cities, mm-hmm. and of many similar cases. And I would not be surprised if that happened in Chile, but I don't know Chile and you do.
Well, actually, we do have the same trouble, because as you know, we've been having a lot of immigration lately coming from other countries, from the region. And something very particular happened. You get into an Uber, and the person, let's say, is from Venezuela. It could be a doctor, it could be an engineer, and he cannot practice his profession here because of the problem that you mentioned.
That happened in the U.S. The sort of fairly famous case is that during about a 5-year period after Hitler came to power, a lot of German Jews fled to America, many of whom were things like physicians. Mm-hmm. But the number of foreign physicians admitted to practice in the United States was about the same as in the previous 5 years, because there were various ways in which the existing American physicians could prevent competition from foreigners. And I think that's probably a pretty common pattern, that the foreigners have very little political influence. The patients in principle should be in favor of it, but for each individual patient it's a very small issue, whereas the existing doctors already have congressmen who they talk to, and they have an organization, the American Medical Association, which was really a trade union, though it didn't call itself that, which is set up to restrict things. And during the Great Depression, the American Medical Association sent a letter to all of the medical schools telling them that they were graduating too many people and they should cut down. And they did cut down. Well, if the AMA didn't approve of you, in effect, your doctors wouldn't get licensed. More complicated than that, but that was the essence of the situation.
Well, Professor, you are an anarcho-capitalist, yes, right? And there's, as you noticed too, there's a lot of police presence, right? Because there's a lot of government buildings that you have a lot of security around this place. So it's a pretty secure place. However, not far away from here, just a few blocks under that street, Alameda, you have what is called Plaza Italia, where is all the protesters since October and all the insurrection that is happening lately. It's been taken by terrorists or vandals, etc., gangs. They're being assaulting store owners for a pretty much long time, and many of them have to leave. How market could solve that problem?
Well, if the government allowed the store owners to hire their own police, then that could solve the problem. And I think that does sometimes happen in some countries. That my impression is that in America, a shopping mall is usually pretty safe because the shopping mall employs its own security, and the owner of the shopping mall wants people to come, and they won't come if they're afraid. But I don't know enough about Chilean law, how you would do that in Chile.
Well, so for you to know, we also have a lot of trouble with the police in the sense that they don't have much backup from government authorities. So there, for example, for a police officer here in Chile to use his weapon, his service weapon, is a really trouble thing to do. Like mostly when they do, they get discharged, they get, fired.
In an interesting case in the U.S., at the moment, not for using weapons, but at the moment there is a set of legal doctrines which basically say that if the police acquire information illegally, they aren't allowed to use it in a trial. And that seems sort of odd, because if the evidence shows that somebody is guilty, you should convict him. But it's a way of trying to keep police from doing illegal things. And I was told by somebody who knew much more of history than I did that in the 19th century, the equivalent issue in instructions for the police was what they had to do in order not to get sued. So that if a policeman did illegal things, if he broke into your house to get the evidence, he could use the evidence, but you could sue him for breaking into your house. And what changed was it became more and more difficult to sue police, to use the law against police for misdeeds, so the only way you could control them was to say that they couldn't use the evidence they got in that way. And so it would make sense, it seems to me, to say that if a policeman shoots somebody, that somebody can sue him. If there's good evidence that it was the policeman's fault, he should be liable, but that you should not say, if there's no evidence it's his fault, that he's involved. But again, I don't really know Chilean conditions well enough, so I can't really give much advice to people in Chile.
No, but I like how you put different examples that happen in your country, because even you don't know much about Chile, it's pretty similar cases happen here. Like not long ago in Rancagua, a police officer stopped a car and opened his the baggage, and he found many weapons, illegal weapons. However, the guy was let free because the fiscalization was illegal. It wasn't through the proper conduct, so he was completely free.
Well, that's the same issue.
Yep. So we had the same trouble. Professor, so yes, not everyone here is convinced, right, of anarcho-capitalism, and one of the good arguments that you mentioned, and I'd like you to explain it to us, is the market failures argument that is very used against.
But that's not just about anarcho-capitalism. That's about the general issue of doing things by voluntary transactions on the market versus doing them by government. And the argument is that in order for a decentralized system to work, you need some way that when an individual takes an act, he bears most of the cost of that act. That if I'm free to do things that benefit me at your cost, then I may do them even if there are things that are not worth doing. And on the market, most of the time, if you want to do something, you've got to pay the cost. If you want people to work for you, you've got to pay them enough so they're willing to do that. If you want people to provide you with cherries to eat for your dinner, you've got to pay the people who are growing the cherries enough so they're willing to do it. Governments do not have that constraint. So whereas you occasionally have cases on the market, such as air pollution, where somebody imposes costs on people without their permission, people in the political system are always imposing costs on people without their permission. And there is no mechanism to make it not in your interest to do something unless it's in the general interest. And therefore people in the political system routinely do things that make most people worse off, but make the people who are paying them or supporting them better off. So what's called market failure, which is when individuals act rationally but groups don't, is a problem that occasionally occurs on the private market and routinely occurs on the political market.
Perfect, Professor. Another big issue that has been happening, that has been discussing here in Chile, is the weapons. All right, so it's kind of hard to get a legal weapon here in Chile. It's costly, but now government is trying to push the idea that people shouldn't have any access to weapon. I mean, not legally. One of the counter arguments that they put on the table is that says, okay, you can take the weapons out of people that have it legally, but you're still gonna have the people that have it illegally. They're still gonna have it. Yes. What are your thoughts about the weapon?
That is the problem with a law against owning firearms is that the people who own firearms are the ones who break the law. And in general, again, I don't know the situation here, but as a practical matter in the U.S., police really can't protect you. Police may be able to arrest somebody after the crime, but it would take an awful lot of police. If you imagine that somebody wants to kill me,
yes,
unless there's a bodyguard all the time, protecting the president takes a whole staff of Secret Service agents. So in practice, somebody breaks into your house, and if you're lucky, half an hour later, the police arrive. Whereas if somebody breaks into your house, you're probably there, and therefore in a position to defend it yourself. So I would have said that the two reasons I'm in favor of people having the right to own weapons. One of them is because it makes it less likely they will be victims of crime. And the other is because if the population is disarmed, then the only protection they have is from the police.
And if the only protection you have is from the police, you are willing to let the police do a lot more bad things than if you only call in the police in exceptional cases and are normally able to protect yourself.
Yeah. So, of the right of using weapons or owning firearms, they put a lot of as an example to USA, talking about the shootings that they've been happening. There's all over the news here. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think is it about as a problem as they say?
First, mass shootings make interesting news stories, but they're a very small part of the murder rate. And the murder rate tends to be high in cities where you are not allowed to own firearms, or at least have not been until very recently, like Chicago and New York. So I don't think, if you look at it, that laws against private ownership of firearms do not keep criminals from having them. And they do mean that ordinary people can't have them unless they're willing to break the law. And obviously the criminal is in a better position if you don't have a weapon than if you do. So that one argument for allowing people to have firearms is that it makes being a criminal more dangerous. And the more dangerous it is, the fewer people will choose to be criminals.
Absolutely. I would like to just ask you two more questions, and one of them is about drugs. What is your position on drugs?
Medical drugs are useful things, and recreational drugs are up to people who want to use them. But I would have said that I don't much like alcohol. I find it rather frustrating if I'm having an argument with somebody who doesn't seem to understand me, and eventually I realize that's because he's half drunk. So I don't like, but it's up to other people's decision whether they want to drink alcohol or smoke marijuana or shoot up heroin, and that I think most of the damage done by drugs is done as a result of their being illegal. That when the U.S. had alcohol prohibition, the result was we had gangsters using submachine guns on each other. When the U.S. has laws against marijuana and heroin and things of that sort, the result is you have a criminal market distributing them. That means you have low quality. That heroin, as I understand it, was originally devised as a medical drug, as a safer substitute for morphine. Medical grade heroin is not very dangerous for you, whereas heroin bought on the street is. And when heroin is illegal, you can only buy it on the street. Similarly, if the drugs are legal, you don't have to steal in order to get enough money for them. I don't think there's very much stealing by people who are alcoholics, because cheap alcohol is cheap. Whereas if drugs are illegal, that then means that they're expensive, and then you have crime associated. So I think if you actually look at it, the bulk of the damage that is done, not that there's none, obviously some people take too much of a drug or whatever, but again, illegal drugs, you're more likely to not know how concentrated they are unless to get an overdose. So I would have said that the main problem is not the drugs, but the laws against them.
A lot of people say that if we legalize drugs, we're going to become a society of addicts.
Well, that doesn't seem to have happened in the past, but after all, I think the present drug laws only in the United States, I think, date from about the 1920s. That there was nothing illegal, as I understand it. Heroin probably didn't exist much before that, but there was nothing illegal about things like cocaine. Freud seems to have been a cocaine addict. And nothing illegal about marijuana, and I don't think we ended up in a society where everybody was a drug addict.
Well, Bismarck himself used to be an opium addict too. Professor, last questions for this section. I wanted to ask you, how do you see, because you're a remarkable academic who's done a lot of contribution to the world of ideas in economics, in laws economics too, right? In the legal systems. And I would like to know, how do you see the future of libertarianism in the world?
I'm not a prophet. I assume that it will become more popular in some places and less popular in others. And I do not know whether the world in a century will be more libertarian or less libertarian than it is, and I doubt anybody else knows either.
But do you feel there are more libertarians than when you started, or less libertarians than when you started?
There are more people who think of themselves as libertarians than when I started, but I am not sure whether actual views are more libertarian. That is to say, there, I think, would have been a good many people when I started who would have taken it for granted that you had to respect property rights without thinking of themselves as libertarians, and that there might be more people now who would say, well, if the government needs the property, then they should take it. So I don't really know. I know that libertarianism as a recognizable philosophy has grown, but I am not sure whether how much people believe in liberty has gone up or down, and it probably is different in different countries.
Thank you very much, Professor.